Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Origin Story, where we dive into the stories of how your favorite creators started their channels. I'm Mike.
And I'm JP, and tonight we're joined by Ed Bolian.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
This is a true
Thanks for
pleasure.
being here.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here. I've already watched the first car trek, so, we're excited. Congratulations on that success there. That's awesome.
Thank you. It's about as much fun as you can have.
I can only imagine, man. It looks super fun to film. So I hope it's as true as it is to watch,
Absolutely. I feel like, as you accumulate any kind of a social audience or following, you owe it to them whenever the opportunities present to kind of step the production quality up and the measures to which you go to produce the content. And that's really what Car Trek represents for us, is just, if we could do anything, what would it be? And it would be exactly Car Trek, because that's essentially what we've been able to build.
Especially, I feel like this season is pretty true to the car enthusiast of you. So I've kind of seen each character, in a sense, have their own season. You kind of did a hoopty season and a project season, and now you're in the lap of luxury. And exotics.
We're trying to be. That was quite an adventure. It ended up being about 3,700 miles round trip, and my back wasn't the happiest, but goodness, it was fun.
Yeah, I can only imagine. So for those who don't know Ed Bolian, he's a former world record holder, author, creator, and entrepreneur. In 2013, he was part of a team who broke the world record for the Cannonball run. This is when you drive from New York to LA in the least amount of time. Ed's team did it in 28 hours, 50 minutes, and averaged 98 miles per hour. That's with stops. So you got to think about like getting gas, getting snacks, going to the bathroom. All of that counts. He also is the creator and CEO of Vin Wiki, a social media network created for the car community. Ed's channels collectively have almost 500 million views and created a community of almost 1.5 million subscribers. He also just released his 4th season of Car Trek, a YouTube series where he and his friends Tyler and Freddie are challenged by their sponsor to find rare cars and take advantage of a variety of challenges. It's extremely entertaining, so go and check that out for sure. This just scratches the surface of Ed's impact into the car and YouTube communities. Make sure to check out the Vin Wiki app, Ed's social media, and his book, For the Record, 28 Hours, 50 Minutes, A Journey Towards Self-Discovery and the Cannonball Run Record. Thank you so much for your time today, and I really look forward to learning about how you found yourself as a celebrity on YouTube.
It's a series of happy accidents, but I'm happy to talk about it. Let's do it.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks for having us. There's a couple things we can't ignore straight out of the gate as we dive kind of into the past of Ed Bolian. The love for reptiles, right? So let's talk about this. Young Ed, growing up, Georgia, right? Growing up in Georgia, there's going to be reptiles around here and there, but you get into this kind of reptile iguana, passion. Where did this come from? How did this start?
Well, if you'd asked me in high school who I wanted to be, it would have been Jeremy Clarkson. But if you asked me in middle school, I wanted to be, it would have been the crocodile hunter. And when I was a kid and I learned that you can go to stores and buy little dinosaurs, I thought that was awesome. And so I had a pet iguana. We had everything. We had, turtles and frogs and salamanders and macaws and all this stuff. And just always enjoyed it. It was, something weird and interesting. Everybody's got a dog or a cat. Nobody's got 36 6-foot long lizards in their parents' basement. So the first business was breeding albino iguanas, and now it's just a fun hobby. I've got Sunny the Lamboa constrictor that
makes an appearance
right over there. Yeah, she's made a couple of Vin Wiki car story cameos quite effectively. People enjoy it. So no Car Trek cameos yet, but perhaps sometime soon.
No, but has starred on a couple of photos with the Gallardo, I believe, right?
That is true. That is true.
Yeah. So you got into breeding them. So where did that did that just happen because they were breeding, or is this something you had proactively thought about doing?
No, I stumbled upon, an old late 90s classified listing for an albino iguana and thought, how cool would it be to have not just a 6-foot long lizard, but one that's fluorescent yellow? And so ended up talking to my parents into the idea that this was a fantastic investment for the family. And before too long, it became 30 some odd lizards in the basement. And it was a very educational thing in the early ways that you learn how a business would work, how to categorize expenses, how to look at revenue, how to figure out profitability and stuff like that. And it was not much revenue or much profitability, but it was an awful lot of fun and a very interesting thing to talk about. And so I think that's always been kind of part of my professional calculation, is certainly how much fun it is, and somewhat, is it lucrative, but very much like, is it an interesting thing to be able to talk about? Because people spend a lot of time talking about what they do. And I always wanted to make sure that it was worth talking about, and that it would open up doors and opportunities into bigger things that weren't necessarily about making money, but were just about, enjoying the opportunities that we have. And I've loved YouTube and the automotive sector of YouTube a lot, because it's just opened up so many doors that I never would have imagined having access to.
Yeah. Where did so it seems like that was like an entrepreneurial drive for you. Where did that spirit come from, and how did that kind of manifest?
So I grew up with two parents who were engineers, and they had wonderful careers, not an entrepreneurial bone in their bodies, and were totally content to raise a great family, spend time with me and my younger brother, and pour into us about life. But it wasn't that they were ever going to be fabulously wealthy and bestow upon us the trust funds that where a lot of YouTube content comes from. It was just one of those things. They were great parents, and they invested in us in time and in energy and being at sports games and not saying no when I say, hey, can we have a whole bunch of lizards? Or, I'm about to get a gigantic loan for a car in college, just like, okay, just, try not to die.
Yeah. And I think we'd be remiss not to mention a shocking reality television show that came out where you just may have some contacts that were in the first episode of the Tiger King, the Joe Exotics.
Yeah. So I didn't expect that, but we were watching Tiger King, and there's a scene in the opening where he opens up some van, and they're talking about selling some illegal cats or snakes or something. And the dude that was selling them to him is a guy I sold a whole bunch of lizards to. Yeah. And I hadn't talked to him in a long, long time, but he put the dots together that some of the iguanas that he still breeds came from me once he learned that I had a little bit more of a following than anybody in the reptile world seems to these days. But it's a strange thing. And exotic pets, exotic cars, I guess it all eventually goes kind of hand in hand. But it's just interesting things to do and think about, and the kind of things that a couple of my 6-year-old's friends came over the other day, and they were asking, can we see the snake? Can we see the snake? They don't do that for somebody's puppy.
Yeah. No, definitely not. That's a great point. They definitely are not like amped to see the puppy. Maybe the first time, but they're not going to come back every time to see the puppy. They're going to, okay. Right. So you end up graduating high school. You still do this job all through college, but in between high school and college, you had an internship at the Panzo Racing School.
Yeah, Panzo's Racing School and the Audi driving experience at Road Atlanta. And that was just kind of a thing that fell in my lap. I knew somebody who had worked there the summer before. And that's something I honestly wish I had done more of, was just finding obscure jobs in the automotive industry, because certainly that was my burgeoning passion at that point. And, I learned so much about how event-based automotive businesses functioned just by seeing that from behind the scenes, and how something that appears so corporate, so well put together, so organized, was really just a bunch of rednecks out there trying to make it look real. And, it's one of those things that, Freddie, one of my co-presenters on Car Trek, Tubeular on YouTube, tweeted yesterday how important faking it till you make it really is in so many things. And that was one of the things that I was starting to figure out, not that you're trying to deceive anyone as to who you are, but just how little everybody does know about what they claim to know a lot about. And in the car world in particular, that was something that was quite rampant. And that was really the takeaway from college for me. And, I ended up going to Georgia Tech, which was a great school locally at the time. If you had decent enough grades, it was free. And I had other scholarships, so I was making money to go to college, which I know for kids entering college today sounds like utter heresy. but it's just one of those things that it was a great circumstance. I absolutely hated every day of college. It was not this like liberating experience. It was actually very confining from an entrepreneurial perspective to, hopefully make six figures for the next 30 years. And that wasn't me. Like I wanted something that I could create and be proud of and have ownership in. And there just wasn't a recipe for that. Now I did find some entrepreneurial people there, but it wasn't necessarily what I was looking for in that regard. However, curriculum wise, I ended up in a liberal arts major, public policy, thinking that if I didn't go to work for myself, I would just go join the CIA or something like that. And what that meant is it was mostly papers and presentations. And I learned very immediately that all that really mattered was if I could speak in a convincing enough way that people didn't doubt it. And so I didn't do any research. I didn't do any preparation. I just stood up there and got the adrenal high of having to present about something I didn't know anything about. And if I could do it well enough that they didn't ask a lot of questions, and I tended to get an A. And it worked out really, really well. And I had a lot of fun doing that. And, did other things on the side.
Yeah. Fake it till you make it. Yeah. It's funny that we saw that because it was a public policy major that you were saying. I mean, was that something you were interested in? Like you said, it was, you were thinking like CAA, things like that. Like, did you actively target that, or did you kind of know going into college, like, oh, this is like something that maybe people go to school for here? Or how did you end up in public policy besides that, like wanting to be, I know you've talked about it a couple of times, but about wanting to be in the CIA or do something like that?
Yeah. I thought it was pretty interesting, quite honestly. I talked to the CIA. They recruit pretty heavily out of Georgia Tech, and it's a pretty interesting career path. But after the National Security Act of 2005, it was a whole lot less interesting. It was not nearly the James Bond fantasy we all have. And so I started out in mechanical engineering, thinking that if I wanted to write about cars, be around cars, that would be useful, and certainly it would. But then I was like, I've never read a road and track article with some differential equations references, so maybe this is not as worthwhile or necessary as it seems to go and make $40,000 a year having fun in cars. And so I said, let's look at what else is out there. And fortunately, it was a pretty young program. There weren't a lot of people in the major, and that I could architect 4-day weekends pretty much every semester. And so as I was looking for more time and bandwidth to explore entrepreneurial options, that became a very useful thing.
Yeah, but let's not diminish some of your biggest accomplishments in college, and let's talk about the winning the campus movie fest. Very funny award and best comedy. What's going on there? And I got something to tack on to that too, because like you have another accomplishment that's fantastic.
But a better accomplishment in my opinion. But let's hear about the campus movie fest.
All right, so we're back with Ed. We had a little bit of a fight with the internet, but we are back in action. We've got a couple more internets, so we're ready to go. But yeah, just to jump back into this, the biggest accolade that we look at, that we love to see from the college career is winning the Campus Movie Fest. Run us through that, the very funny award and best comedy as well. So run us through this.
Sure. Yeah, this was back in the days of mini DV tapes and barely iMovie, but it was a lot of fun. My roommates and I just watched Wedding Crashers one too many times and saw our big no sense of humor lecture halls and thought this would be a fun intersection of those ideas. And so we made a few different videos where we would just crash lectures and do different pranks. And it was funny at the time. Maybe it's a little bit funny now, but we had an awful lot of fun. Got in a little trouble, but nothing too bad. But yeah, won some awards with it, of all craziness.
Yeah. And did you ever like kind of make funny videos before that with like friends growing up, or is this kind of like your first take into like starting to make funny videos, or like at least have some sort of content really?
No, that was it. I had made some videos related to a rally that I had done between high school and college. It was like kind of a gumball knockoff thing that we had done, and we had to shoot some of it for an MTV True Life show that had followed us along and kind of documented that. And so I was on the MTV True Life show before the episode that launched the Jersey Shore. And so obviously we didn't go the same route, but yeah, so that was in October of 2004. And then I entered college right then. And so, yeah, we did that, I think 3 or 4 years, and had an awful lot of fun with it.
That's awesome. And then the other piece that we saw and that we love, Intramural Championship and Slam Dunk Contest.
Yeah.
I was the Georgia Tech Intramural Slam Dunk Contest champion. And I was not the only competitor. There were, I think, 8 or 9 of us. But
Okay,
yeah.
that's important to know. And did they retire your intramural jersey? Did they retire that into the gym that day?
Absolutely. Yeah. I got a new special shirt in honor of that.
What was the dunk that made you the champion?
I think I jumped over one of my roommates and did some kind of a reverse. And one of my friends gave me the advice that the more you swing on the rim, the more impressive it looks. And that was really the difference maker. He was exactly right. He was 5'4", so it didn't matter to him, but he was exactly right.
Yeah, he definitely wasn't winning the dunk contest.
That's it.
And that was back when it was Ed Good Knees. You had the good knees back then. You were no issues, right?
Well, this was post-surgery. I had 6 knee surgeries in high school, so I couldn't play every day, but I could go out, once or twice a week and have some fun. So I was there at Georgia Tech right after they'd gone to the Final Four. So I go out at night and play with Jarrett Jack and Ishmael Muhammad and Will Bynum and Luke Schincher and a lot of the guys that ended up at, playing professionally for a while. But it was good times, the right amount, rather than trying to dress out every day and being even more sore.
Yeah, I think that adds more to the accolade that you got there. So that's good. So you got all this going on. Obviously, Georgia Tech, you're making funny videos. You're winning slam dunk contests. You're doing intramurals, but you grow up with exotics. Now you're getting back into exotics. So now you start renting exotics in college. So exotic to exotic, Joe Exotic to, I don't know, another guy.
Bro Exotic.
Exotic cars. Yeah. So walk us through that. That was your sophomore year of college. You started.
It was, yeah. It was an idea that had come up with a friend of mine back in high school. And, we were kind of thinking we want to have exotic cars one day. And what's one way to do it? Rent them. Well, we can't afford to rent them. Well, somehow the guys that rent them out have them. So why don't we try to do that? But at that point, there were only exotic car rental companies in Los Angeles, Las Vegas, and Miami. Gotham Dream Cars, which Rob Ferretti continues to be involved with, was being founded by one of his friends, Noah, and I'd helped them kind of locate the second car in their fleet, and I knew what they were doing. And they started about 6 to 12 months before I ended up starting a company called Supercar Rentals based in Atlanta. And there was one company that had a Ferrari 360 for rent in Atlanta for a very short time, and it got crashed. They didn't really replace it. And so it was really a unexplored business model in what you'd call kind of like second tier cities that are not huge tourist hubs that you're going to end up with just a constant influx of people who can give you, that kind of business. And so for me, it was more so like ownership replacement clients, but I wanted to start this business, but I didn't have any money. And so I was trying to figure out, how to do that, looking at different investors and things like that. But at the time, this was 2006. I mean, you could get an exotic car loan by fogging a mirror. Like, it was really stated income, simple. And so I found a bank that would work with me. Actually, it was a local credit union, and bought my first car for the fleet, which was a 2004 Lamborghini Gallardo. And I sold the 2000 B5 Audi S4 that I had, that my parents had bought for me, quite honestly, because college was so free and they had saved money for me to go to college. And they're like, well, we're not spending anything. The Land Rover that you have, my mother blew it up, not knowing that there was a coolant temp gauge on it. And so they're like, you need another car, we'll buy you something really cool. And that was amazing. I still love those cars to this day. But I sold that and had no other car other than an old family Grand Am to borrow. And I ended up using that as the entire down payment for the Gallardo. And so I didn't have enough money left to make the first payment. And so I had to start renting it out immediately. And I did. And it started to work, and, used the internet for marketing, forums and things like that. Went to car shows, and over time it just grew and became a thing. And I added a Ferrari about 6 months later, another Ferrari about 6 months after that. And, try to just keep it going. It never became too huge because, quite honestly, you end up with a fleet of cars that just sit in a warehouse, and all you need is 4 or 5 cars to sort of saturate the demand of the Atlanta market. Yep. And it was a good time. Learned a lot, certainly. Made a lot of mistakes, more certainly. And but yeah, that was probably the first real foray into solo entrepreneurism. And it ended up working out.
Yeah, and I guess one question: what was the color of the B5 S4 that you sold?
Silver.
Okay, all right.
What color is yours?
Mine's silver, yeah. Silver with
Yeah.
the white leather, but I was wondering if you were gonna say if it was like a laser red and Nagara blue, or you know what I
No,
mean?
it would have been
What
nice to be an
special ones.
Agara Blue, and it would have been nice to be an Avant, but it was actually the
Yep.
Champion Motorsports show car. It was for sale locally in Atlanta. Like, you know, you mentioned yours before we started recording. There was a Stage 2 Plus, same idea, you know, waiting on the stock turbos to blow to throw KO4s in there, and
Exactly.
the as you do. And so it's interesting. We're exploring some first car premises for future Car Trek series.
That would be
And
cool.
so you never know. There might be an S4 coming back into the mix at some point.
Yeah. Well, I did see the car wizard looking at one a couple of months ago. I remember he was going over one in the shop, and I said, "Oh, what do we got here?" You know. So no, but I love that background on the exotics piece, and that must have just been a crazy experience. I mean, even just like from an insurance perspective and like damage and dealing with that type of stuff, what did you do? Like, did you ever get a car back or a call from somebody that's like, "Hey, it won't start, I'm on the side of the freeway"? Like, how did you deal? Like, did anything like that ever happen?
Every day. Yeah. It's one of those things, like every time it leaves, you have to like emotionally prepare yourself for half of it to come back on a tow truck. And
Yeah.
it happens. Yeah. I mean, the week of my wedding, I ended up, I had a customer that was a former Atlanta police officer that had rented several times come in and rent the Gallardo. That was the first car, and a Ferrari 612 that I had. And over the course of a week, he kind of kept extending the rentals, and I ended up finding the Gallardo crashed and abandoned in the middle of town, and finally got him to answer his phone and learned that he had sold the 612 to a guy for a BMW 750, $15,000 in cash and an agreed upon payment term. And he somehow thought I might be happy about that. And I wasn't, obviously. And the only piece of information he got from this gentleman was that his name was Lucky. So I got a call during my bachelor party from Lucky's wife. And she said, this was the first I'd heard of it. My husband is the guy who bought your Ferrari from your employee today, but I don't know that we really want to keep it. And so I'd like to get my BMW and my cash back, and we're just going to then give you your car back. And I said, well, there's about every single thing in that sentence wrong.
Do you have the right
Yeah, I said, I hope you don't. And so, yeah, literally, I'm out with my groomsmen trying to figure out what I'm doing with the rest of my life. And eventually I tell her, look, the car is effectively stolen because this guy does not have permission to sell it, which I learned very quickly is not Grand Theft Auto. It is theft by conversion. And so I spent the next week leading up to the wedding trying to get her to bring it back, but I didn't have her BMW, and this guy wasn't real interested in giving it back. And he'd been giving me the cash over time to try to buy himself time to figure it all out. And so I ended up getting married with the car still missing. We'd obviously recovered the Gallardo with its tracking device, but the 612 kept moving and showing up at different valets. And I'd call them and tell them like, hey, this is my car and I'm coming to get it. And they're like, well, we can't not give it to the person with the ticket. Like, that's not our job. And the cops won't chase it if it's in a different county. And so absolute mess. But I ended up just kind of having to leave it in my lawyer's hands and God's and go on my honeymoon. But I got back, and eventually Lucky kind of realized he wasn't going to be able to do much with this stolen Ferrari 612. And so he said, I'll give it back to you, but I need $5,000. And at the time I didn't have $5,000. Like, quite honestly, it was just not, I was not paycheck to paycheck. I was rental to bill. And so I was talking to the cops that were on the case, and they're like, well, why don't you just see if he'll take a check and then just write him a bad check? And I said, I'm sorry, Mr. Police Officer, I feel obligated to remind you that it's a felony to knowingly bounce a $5,000 check. And he's like, oh, don't worry about it. We don't care. I said, okay. And Lucky was glad to take a check. And so I wrote Lucky a check for $5,000, signed it Mickey Mouse. And absolutely. He got real mad, threatened to kill me. But we gave me the car back. So of course the battery's dead. We had to have it towed.
You signed it Mickey Mouse?
With just some fake Ed signature that he didn't know
amazing.
wasn't real. And so the bank calls it, and it's like, I was like,
Did you meet him?
Don't
Meet him
honor
in
that
person?
check, bank. What's that?
Did you meet him in person at all?
I did. Yeah.
Lucky.
And he actually brought out his, he had a terrible Maserati Quattroporte that he had repainted like seafoam green, and the paint was flaking off, and he was asking me questions about it. I recommended a good body shop,
Those hold
which
up
I had
well.
sent the car that his friend had already crashed. So
Fantastic. Yeah, those
didn't hear anything else from Lucky after that.
And so after you you move from rentals, you join the sales community as part of Lamborghini, Ferrari, and McLaren, right? All three of those in one.
Not Ferrari, Lamborghini,
Not Ferrari.
McLaren, Aston Martin, and
Aston
Lotus.
Yeah. So you start selling these brands and you become extremely good. Well, obviously you knew everything from renting and all the issues that could go around these cars, and you had built that base. So you join, then you become like the number one salesperson at some time, and get to fly to Italy, get to drive the cars there. How did you like build your rapport and business at the dealership?
So
And how
that
did
was
you
in
find yourself at the dealership?
2009, and I'd been approached by the general manager of the store, and he'd been asking me for a while, seeing me through service, and he just needed salespeople, to be quite honest. And so I had absolutely no interest in that. When I was a high schooler, my hobby was going and conning my way into test driving exotic cars, and I knew how miserable the day-to-day life was of a car salesman, and I was like, sounds awful. But in a moment of weakness and at the prodding of my wife, I decided to give it a shot. And so I learned very quickly that it was a whole lot easier to make money with them taking the risk rather than me. That's it. Yeah. So at the nudging of my wife, I decided to give it a shot. And, this was in 2009. The economy had kind of bottomed out, quite honestly. Like, people who had decent enough credit to be able to buy the cars stopped renting them. Prior to that, they'd been renting as sort of an alternative to ownership. They were avoiding the servicing cost and the maintenance cost and all the things. And so they just kind of decided, you know what, the market's bottomed out. You're buying them for pennies on the dollar. And so it became a very economics calculation to sell them, because you had to convince them of how they were going to mitigate costs of ownership and how that might work out. And it ended up being a very, very interesting time. I made a lot of money, had a lot of fun. The hours were terrible. The quality of life was weak, but I learned very quickly that it was a whole lot easier to make money selling cars than it was renting them, when I had to take all the risks versus them taking all the risks. And so I kind of wanted to see if I wanted to be a car dealer at some point. And I learned very quickly, no, I did not want to do that, because pretty much every month I was there, I made more than the GM and the owner. That's just the way car pay plan works. But either way, I learned a ton, had a ton of fun, obviously got a lot of fun stories to tell, and, just went on to figure out what was next.
Yeah. And didn't you, you won a contest, right? Didn't you win a contest where it was like, you did something with the simulations and you were supposed to go to, I think, to Italy and then drive on the track?
I did, yeah. So yeah, it was like a salesperson knowledge contest, and I won that. And then the finalist of that got to go and compete at Michael Schumacher's F1 simulator, and I won that. And we were supposed to get to go drive a Gallardo GT3 car at Imola, but it was snowing, so I didn't get to do that. But we had to go to Imola for the Huracan launch. Amazing track, super fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, yeah, I mean, I guess transitioning in, like, let's chat. I mean, everyone's going to want to know a little bit about Cannonballing, right? So it's like, I know you've covered it quite a few times. I guess, what are, tell us some things about, like, maybe Cannonball that's not so much talked about, I guess. I mean, we know the records, we know,
Sure.
what's going on. I have a specific question about modern time Cannonballing, but I'm curious, like, what kind of really got you into it?
Quite honestly, as I saw it and I heard about it and I saw the movies and read the stories and read what Brock Yates had written, it seemed like a challenge that fit the things I wanted to be able to prove about myself, in the ability to solve complex problems, the ability to manage risks, the ability to do something unique that became interesting down the road to talk about, and something that would be initially off-putting and to anybody with any level of risk aversion, but that I felt like I could kind of wrap my head around and tackle. And so I had no idea if I'd ever be successful at it, but it just seemed like the kind of thing that the person I wanted to be would be successful at. And that was really the treasure in it. It wasn't about what you were doing. It was the fact that it exhibited the qualities that you wanted to make sure existed within yourself.
Yeah.
And so that was really the treasure that I found in Cannonball, and through the decade that it took me, because I mean, when I set the goal of doing it, I was a high school senior, and I talked to Brock Yates on the phone. I was able to call and interview him at Car and Driver, and I said that one day I wanted to do this, but obviously at that time I had no idea or roadmap as to how that might work. But I wanted to figure out a way to put it all together, and it took a long time. But through that, it kind of was that ever-present background distraction, subconscious obsession that just kind of kept me going, kept being that thing that I don't know how I'm getting any closer to it, but I just don't want to be further away from it. And I want to continue to solve these, parts of it, the drive plan, the countermeasures, the gadgets, all the things, and just trying to figure it all out. And so in that regard, it was just the perfect challenge for who I wanted to be.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. And it's funny because I feel like a lot of what you cover, especially and what you guys do, especially with Car Trek, it's all about like kind of the journey of doing it all.
Yeah,
like there is, you get an outcome, you get a video at the end, but the experience in the middle that leads up to it and builds up to it, and the planning and, the projecting and doing all these different things. It seems like that's like kind of what interests you into those type of things.
Exactly. With Car Trek, we only document it so that we get to do it. So
yeah, well, it's fantastic. And I mean, we all, I think, well, I mean, especially me, it's like, we grew up on the Fifth Gear and the Top Gear and all those type of shows. And I don't know, nowadays, when I was a kid, it was like, all right, what are we going to watch? Road and Track? Like, there's only a couple different selections that you can watch now. And it's funny to see what you guys are doing, because I think, even Top Gear and those things have kind of deteriorated to the point where it's like, I wouldn't say it's no slight against Car Trek, because I think Car Trek is like taking it and just going even further. Like, I absolutely love what you guys are doing with that, and it's entertaining. And I think you guys are up to like 230,000 views already on the first episode today. It's fantastic. So 280,000, something like that. So you guys are cruising
closer to 280 in 9 hours, which was a pretty amazing growth in months. So before we, I think JP had one question about cannonballing before we roll into.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. I did want to ask, what's your take, modern day cannonballing? It's a little bit different in COVID times. You're seeing, I mean, how many records have been broken recently? I think a couple times now.
Yeah, it's at least 3 times advancing the record. I mean, I think my record's been broken 12 times during COVID.
Yeah. And do you put an asterisk on that?
We don't know yet. I mean, certainly it's different, and certainly it's all faster. And if guys in a diesel Passat can go out and beat what we were able to do, good on them, and nothing to take away from how awesome that experience must have been. But it's not the same game necessarily. And once we're truly on the other side of it and traffic is really back to normal, that's when you get to decide, is there an asterisk? We can't say that there is or isn't, or even if anybody cares. Right. What I do know is that as sort of accidentally the curator of the documentation of a lot of this stuff, the world got real tired of hearing about it. And, when you hear about a new cannonball record every like 5 to 10 years, that's something that people have an appetite for. Right. When it's every month, they don't. And they don't know who has it. They don't care. They don't get it. They don't understand what people are doing. And that's where we kind of got to in the last year. And we had some people lying about it. We had some people trying to pretend that they hadn't done it. And it was just a hard thing for anyone who cared to even consume information about it to really get to the bottom of. And so I don't know how that's going to shake out. And it may be the thing that flips over the sandbox and just says, nobody cares anymore. And that's okay. It meant a lot to me, having nothing to do with the accumulation of a social media audience or anybody else caring. It meant a lot to me to get to the Portofino, know that I'd done it faster than 3104, and be there. Like if that was all I ever got, I got more than I ever bargained for. And so I love that people care. I love that people watch the videos. I love that I've developed so many amazing friendships through it. But it was one of those things that, look, it was just for me. And it required a lot of other people doing a lot of other things. And I'm so grateful to them. But I didn't have any real expectation afterwards. And I mean, now people do it expecting to come tell a Vin Wiki car story about it. But I don't really know how to manage that expectation all that much.
Yeah. You have your moment in history, though. It's already, it's in the books. It's already there. Any plans to ever come back and do it again in the future?
I do it a lot. I did it a month or so ago in a replica of the Transcon Medevac ambulance, and we broke down in Pennsylvania. There are some guys putting together a 100 horsepower race that I might go and do that. Like that kind of junk is tons of fun.
Where there's like some more limits to it, and it's kind of everyone's in the same class.
And you can't get in that much trouble, right? I mean, and I spent every dollar I had plus $5,000 to try it when I was 28 years old. And it was, I mean, it was all of it. And like, we released a story recently where my co-driver and the co-driver and the record and the guys that beat us, so Dave Black and Doug Tabbitt, told a story, and they were like making fun of the fact that they had stabilized binoculars and I had some, you know, the nicest binoculars from Bass Pro Shops that I could return the next week because and they're like, oh, Ed doesn't believe in binoculars. No, Ed can't afford military surplus gyro stabilized night vision binoculars. There's a big difference. And so like I love what it's become. But that being said, like if it was my only obsession today, it scares me what you'd have to do. I mean, I had a guy tell me we can't go through major metropolitan areas, but I know how we could wrangle a predator drone to scout for cops. And I'm like, I need to not hear these things out loud because it develops bad behavior patterns. It's like, you know, so I'm glad to have done it when I did and to have left that obsession behind. And for everything that meant to me personally, like it was fun and it was, you know, it was a ton of fun. It was great. It was everything I wanted it to be. But like car trek is more fun. It might be less of an achievement, but it's a whole lot more fun to do those drives than it is to not get arrested driving that fast that long.
I thought it was interesting that you beat the record before you was the guy from Fast and Loud, right?
So it was complicated because in May of 2007, Richard Rawlings and Dennis Collins from Fast and Loud went out in a Ferrari 550 Maranello that's in the first episode of Car Trek, and they drove 31 hours and 59 minutes from a Red Ball garage in Manhattan to the Portofino Inn in Redondo Beach. At that time, there were 2 Red Ball garages in Manhattan, one on East 31st Street, which is the one that Car and Driver used to house their press fleet. That was the correct one to leave from, but it was not the first result on Google. So they went to the one on East 34th Street. Not a big deal, not a massively consequential difference, but it was the wrong one. 6 months earlier, Alex Roy and Dave Maher had gone 31 hours and 4 minutes, so beating it by almost an hour in a BMW M5. But they had stayed very, very quiet. They had all of their supporters, all their scouts, all their people sign NDAs and not release anything. And so when Richard and Dennis diverted from Bull Run to set this record at a bet from Jay Rickey, they claimed for $50,000, they didn't know that the mark to beat was not 32 hours and 7 minutes. So they set the record from kind of the right points, but Alex Roy and Dave Maher had already set another record, which they released about 6 months after Richard and Dennis did. However, they started from the New York Classic Car Club and they ended at the Santa Monica Pier, which is New York to LA certainly, but it's about a 30-minute advantage because you're right at the mouth of the Holland Tunnel and you're ending just at the end of I-10.
Right.
And so it was, they had this like, you know, huge disagreement, and they both claimed that the other didn't do it. They both claimed that the other didn't matter, even if they did. And so it was a very, very difficult thing. But from my perspective, like I knew I had to beat both of them and I had to do it from the right start and end points. And so it really didn't matter. And fortunately I was able to, and that kind of reunified it and kind of set the expectation that not only you have to prove it, but you've also got to go from Red Ball to Portofino.
Yeah. And I think if anything, the major factor for me that makes any difference is I was in New York 4.5 weeks ago for a weekend, and I live 90 miles southeast of New York City. It would take the bus and everything. I've never been on Madison Avenue, and I was there at 10 a.m. on a Sunday. I counted like 16 cars.
Yeah.
So it is a very different world to leave that city in the current climate versus that. That's the only kind of opinion I would have on it is but at the same time, if you're smart, you could leave at 2:00 in the morning or 4 a.m. when there's not so much traffic. You're going through all of those details in your head when you're planning a Cannonball for sure. So
correct. Yeah. So it took us 12 minutes to get to Lincoln Tunnel. You know, I just did it in this ambulance and it took us 6. Now we may or may not have used the lights and sirens, but it,
No one can tell.
you know,
Yeah.
it went in Rome.
You
Yeah.
never know. You never know which switches do what. You know what I mean? It's
Thought
like
they were the Flash.
You
I
did
thought so,
yeah.
Pete.
I didn't know I couldn't do that ghost word. So so you end up creating this company called Vin Wiki. And I have two kind of questions about it. Is like, one is, was it a collective knowledge base of the rental industry of exotics, the sales and I guess just sales industry of selling exotics, all of those weird practices of like buying used ones and having cars that you were selling that were very used or slightly used, and getting Carfax and getting bad data? Was that what led you to VinWiki?
No. So I left the dealership just based on the fact that I was tired of it. My attention span was long since past, and I really didn't want to work 80 hours a week anymore. And in that world, you be successful so that you can be rewarded with the chance to work more. And that just wasn't what I was looking for. And as great as it was to be able to make a lot of money, I wanted more ownership of my own success. And so I needed something different. And so I left not having any idea what was going to be next. And I certainly didn't know that was going to be 2 years to the day before I made $1. And so I'd been in the habit of meeting with different friends that had different entrepreneurial gifts, different specialties, different ideas. And we would just spitball things like, could we do this? Who's got an idea? Could we put it together? And we talked about a lot of things. We talked about educational programs, we talked about product sales, we talked about rental concepts, we talk about real estate, we talk about the idea of a crowdsourced vehicle history reporting platform, the idea that if we were to compile the knowledge of enthusiasts, it would be a really, really useful tool in determining the value of a pre-owned car, especially in the cases where Carfax and AutoCheck fail, which is really the extremes. So for a really, really expensive car, Carfax is worthless. For a really, really cheap car, Carfax is worthless, because it's kind of like an SAT score. If it's good, it means nothing. And if it's bad, it might mean something. And so we wanted to build a way that stakeholders could control and manage the perception and the value of the cars that they had. And of course, that was just an idea that came out of the way that I'd sold cars, the way I'd owned cars, the way I'd tracked cars that I'd owned and sold in the past. And me trying to find out, man, I'd really wish this was a thing that I could use. And so there was a front-end web developer, there was a front-end iOS developer, there was a back-end data architect, there was some other sales guys, marketing guys, my lawyer, my accountant. And so we essentially had all the pieces together to start that business. And they were all like, yeah, we don't mind spending, a few hundred hours working on a proof of concept there, a minimally viable product. And so that we did. And when I left, the last thing in the world I wanted to be was a technology entrepreneur. Well, I should say that. The second to last thing I wanted to do was be a technology entrepreneur. The one thing I knew I didn't want to do was be a social media influencer. And so we start this app, and people, you think always when you put out an app that you spend a lot of time. We spent 6 months and 47 iterations of this app, testing it with hundreds of beta users. You think you're just going to tap that domino and a butterfly is going to flap its wings in Kansas and you're going to become Mark Zuckerberg. That's not how it goes. And so we ended up with a few hundred users and then a few thousand users, and they got it. But it was like we were at no risk of exponential growth and user evangelism and all the things that you dream about when you watch Silicon Valley. But I ended up, just kind of being at a point about a year in where I was the only one able to put any effort in because everybody else had kind of run out of runway. And the only thing I could do was market it. That was because I can't write code and I can't even read it to know if it's right. And so we were kind of at a crossroads where we're like, well, what do we do? Do we, we've had some success in marketing, but all we've really learned is that our cost of user acquisition is like $5 a user. And I don't have $500,000 sitting around to get our next 100,000 users. So I also don't think a venture capitalist is going to give it to us for that. So we're either going to just kind of shelve this thing. But the only real success that we'd had economically with marketing the Vin Wiki app had been when friends of mine that I knew through the car industry would talk about it on YouTube. So when we set the Cannonball record, Doug DeMuro was the first journalist that wrote about it. I'd known Doug since college. I knew what he was doing around Atlanta, working at Porsche and stuff like that. And I'd asked him, I said, hey, Doug, would you mind mentioning Vin Wiki in a couple of your videos? And he said, I couldn't possibly. I'm like, what do you mean, Doug? It's the internet, the videos. It's not a real thing. And he's like, oh no, I just don't want to delegitimize myself to my YouTube audience. And I was like, Doug, if I were to replay what you just said, would you slap yourself in the face for how crazy that sounds? Because at the time he probably had a couple 100,000 subscribers, and I was like, he's like, no, man, no, it's real. Like I might make $10,000 this month on YouTube, and I was like, are you serious? Like that's a real thing in your life? And he's like, yeah, man. I don't do any brand deals. I don't do any sponsorships. Like I want him to know that like my opinions are real. Like, well, that's very admirable, Doug. Others of my friends were not quite so resolute. And so I knew Rob Ferretti, I knew Tavares, I knew a lot of these other guys that had kind of intersections with other parts of the automotive world. And they would come to town, they'd drive my cars, do car reviews, and mention that they, knew about my app. And we'd get a lot of users. So I said, there are people who watch car YouTube videos that will download our app, and I would really like more of them to do that. And so I thought, all right, here's what I'll do. I'll get a bunch of beer and a bunch of pizza in my warehouse, and we're going to sit around, me and my friends, and we're going to tell car stories. However, I didn't know anything about editing a video. I didn't know anything about putting it on YouTube. I didn't even know if my AdSense account had been reinstated since I made a video driving a Lamborghini, and some of my coworkers clicked the ads and I got demonetized at the dealership. And so I was like, I don't even know if it would work, but it didn't matter because I was like, there's no way we'd ever accumulate an audience. So all I'm going to do is make these videos with a friend from church that can do the videography, and I'll give them to anybody with an audience that I'll put them on there. So at the time, I think Freddie had like 60,000 subscribers, Tavares. And so I was like, well, I'll just say, hey, I've got these perfectly produced Vin Wiki car stories branded as Vin Wiki content, talking occasionally about a Vin Wiki app. How about I give them to you and you put them on your channel? And I asked Rob Dahm and TJ Hunt and David Patterson and all these guys that I'd met, and they all said no. And I'm like, what? Why would you say no to that? It's good. Like I showed it to you. It's okay stuff.
Free content.
Exactly. However, YouTube channels should really be called YouTube shows.
Yeah.
And if you vary the content strategy, it can very much jeopardize the audience.
Yep.
And so their fear was like, we know our users, our viewers, our people are here for what they saw yesterday. If I give them something different tomorrow, I can't necessarily be confident they're going to watch it. And if they don't, I do know that it will screw up the next week or so of my content. And so I can't take that kind of risk with this thing that I don't even know how it works. And so the analytics are very descriptive rather than prescriptive. You can kind of only glean, I should do tomorrow what I did yesterday, or I should do something different. Mm-hmm. And so, that's really where they all work. So I kind of was left with, we shot these things. I guess the only thing left to do is put them on my own channel. And I agreed with the guy who had helped me make them. I was like, hey, if these get like 2,000 views a video, we'd shot 25 the first day, 50,000 views total. Let's agree that we'll make some more. And they ended up getting 800,000 views, which scared the heck out of him, justifiably. And he said, if we keep doing this, it's going to very quickly become somebody's full-time job, and it ain't going to be me. So we had about 5 more videos left at that point, a week maybe of content. And I was like, well, this is the only thing that has ever worked to promote the thing that I just poured a year of my life into. I'd like it to keep happening. We were long from making money or anything like that, but I was like, it's the only thing I have that's working. So I need to figure out how to do this. And so I got a sponsor for another month of content and went out, bought the same camera, the same lens, the same lights, and tried to learn how to do it. Rendered my first video at 380p, uploaded it with the worst echo that you could ever believe, and started learning. And so there's like 25 really good Vin Wiki videos, and then there's about 30 abysmal failures as I experiment in trying to learn how to do all these things that I did not do for Campus Movie Fest or early Vin Wiki or anything at all. And then I started to figure it out, and we were still shooting them on a big open warehouse with the most atrocious echo and noisy neighbors pumping waste oil out of fast food restaurants and trying to just make it work because we kept getting users. And like, I remember the day that I made $100 on YouTube, and I was like, man, I just made more than my elementary school teacher wife today. I am dominating the world. And thinking and realizing that at some point that extrapolated, like, this might actually become my full-time job despite everything I wanted out of life. And so I kind of told the developers who had a minority stake in VinWiki from an equity perspective, I was like, I can't believe I'm having this conversation, but I think it's best for all of us if I become a professional YouTuber. And I hope I'm wrong, but if I'm not, and I have to do it, like, I'll keep the revenue from it and make it my job and promote our app and increase our value and all the things that we hope happens. And I'll do that. And they were like, oh yeah, sure. You know, they all had other jobs and other things. They're like, yeah, if you want to go make internet videos, you do that. And so I did. And that was where the channel came from. And we kept, you know, having other people come into town and tell stories, and
it seems very much like growing a YouTube channel and growing an app have the same trajectory, right? Like, how many people have been, you know, we talked about this earlier, 47 episodes. Of the 46 other people, many of them have done videos for 8 years, 5 years, 6 years with very low content. Then one video takes off. It's like an app. You might not hit something, but something in the world might happen. Now that search term is there and your app blows up.
Sure. You never know what's going to be that tipping point of virality. Fortunately, we got the content style right from day one.
Yeah.
So VinWiki car stories don't look a whole lot different 1,100 of them in than day one. And that was great. I mean, I can't change it. I mean, if you came into my studio and you pressed a bunch of buttons on my camera, I'd have to call a guy to fix it. And so I've been able to figure it out. And that is a blessing of YouTube, that there's not this content quality threshold that makes it impossible for somebody who has literally no experience whatsoever in the craft to come in and make something. It doesn't mean that I could produce a car review. It doesn't mean by any means that I could do Car Trek by myself without a professional film crew and co-presenters that are much better at it than I am. So it's one of those things where I found a thing that I could do and replicate and repeat, and that's what worked out. And that's really where it came from, was not so much like, I want this to be a thing. This is the only thing I can do, and maybe it'll be a thing.
It's funny how it came from like almost like a marketing necessity to like, I would say, I don't know, what percentage would you put in it now that you focus on YouTube? I mean, 100%.
100%. Yeah. I mean, fortunately the app is stable. It grows in the background. We started at 5,000 users the day that I started the channel, and we're now at 400,000 users. And so wow. We're a very interesting tech startup from the perspective of, we have linear growth, and that doesn't happen. You either have exponential growth because your users are self-replicating and they're evangelizing the concept, or you don't grow.
Yeah.
We have success in marketing, and all our revenue comes from marketing. And so people love the app. They use the app. I mean, you could put just about any VIN in the US in and find something interesting about it. But at the same time, like, we're a long way from monetizing that concept. And, you know, that company, or it's the same company, but it may end up having a different trajectory at some point. But at the moment, they're just, you know, symbiotic things that, you know, it is what it is. And so I never imagined it. And so I do consider it just a series of happy accidents is how it all came together. And it's everybody has their own origin story of how something they do now began back then. And certainly that's the case with me. But, you know, I never sought out being famous. That's why more than 90% of the Vin Wiki content isn't Ed. It's not about Ed. It's about great car stories. And I had heard great car stories, and I knew that they deserve to be immortalized. And I'm not saying everyone we've had deserves to be immortalized, but the good ones certainly did. And they were the kind of things that somebody's grandkids were going to get tired of hearing, but that other grandkids would love to hear. And that's what we've kind of tried to be.
It's pretty crazy that you guys nailed the format so early on, because I always watch like the newest videos, the oldest videos, and a little bit in between. Yours was a lot harder to find in between. 1,000+ videos is a lot harder. But you really you said it there. You nailed it right at the beginning, which is something we don't find. And I think the stepping stones that you had coming to here and knowing what you wanted to do when you started the channel is exactly what was there. Where I feel like a lot of people start a YouTube channel without that motive and understanding, and they find that through the mistakes, but your mistakes were ahead of the channel and you knew exactly why you needed it. So can you speak to a little bit of like why you felt that I guess you just kind of said it as like car stories were stories that your family hears, but you wanted to share them out with the world. And why was that the brand behind the Vin Wiki name?
Well, the idea was very much that these stories are blown up versions of posts that would be appropriate in the Vin Wiki app. And so when I think of like the ideal Vin Wiki car story, it has a VIN, it has a thing that happened that may or may not influence the value of the car. It has the connection between an owner and that car, and potentially that car and other cars. And so it kind of outlines what happened to a car that might be great. Like there's a lot of cars that are worth a lot more money because of something that happened in them. And there are a lot of cars that are worth a lot less money because of something that happened in them. And I buy those too.
Yeah.
And so I think that was really the motivation, but the motivation of, well, not the motivation, but the thought that it might fit YouTube is that those tend to be entertaining stories, and I wanted them to be. And it's not infinitely so far beyond that versus what I expected was ever possible. Because you got to think, like, we started in 2007 or 17.
Yep.
And at that point, there were maybe 5 million subscriber automotive YouTubers. And now there's probably like 300. I don't know. It's a different landscape.
Yeah. And you have almost 500 million views. That's it. 456, 311. I put it as, flat, but there's obviously a couple of views after that. An unbelievable amount of content being watched. You have, just to break your channel down a little bit more, so 1,067 videos, 9 videos are over 3 million views, 13 videos are over 2 million views, and you have 107 videos. I had to scroll multiple times on my laptop. The trackpad is large to get to the bottom of the number of million view videos, which is something that I think almost every creator aspires to have a single video at 1 million. So can you like break down the feeling of two things, right? Where you get your first 500 or 100,000 subscribers, because that's a big milestone. That's a validation that the content's there. And then what happened when you watched your first video cross 1 million views?
For sure. So when we started, there were 3 videos that had most of our views. More than half of the views, probably 50 videos in, were from McLaren F1 maintenance nightmares. My wife bought a rapper's Ferrari for 31 grand, and I bought a Lamborghini from a prostitute. And so each of those have become million view videos in their own right now. But at that point, where we had 800,000 views, they were well over half.
Great
and
title.
So I it's one of those things where you're trying to figure out, well, I don't have a whole lot of prostitute transactions to talk about on the internet, and I'm not terribly interested in creating more of them. And so how am I going to continue replicating this from a content perspective? I don't even think I could even solicit such stories to be told. And so I think that when I saw the McLaren F1 video was the first one to pass 100,000, and that was surreal because like I never imagined that was possible, particularly on a channel at the time that probably had like 15 or 20,000 subscribers. Like we were seeing growth, but not these crazy spikes. And at this point, the thing that I'm most proud of when I look at our library of content is that there aren't stupid outliers that look inconsistent. So we don't have a 15 million view video and then the next one's at 3. And as nice as it would be for tomorrow's video to hit 15 million, and please like, share, and subscribe to that. Yeah. But I'm very, very glad that we have a whole cross section from 100,000 views or 50,000 views on some low ones all the way up to 3 point whatever million. And so that's great. And the videos that have a lot of views are good. And there's a handful of there that just got the right clickbait, and that's the name of the game. But at the same time, like you're not going to go sort by most popular and then get some really, really bad Vin Wiki content, which there are channels that's what happens because just the algorithms grab a video and it gets shared by, world star hip hop, and it becomes the thing. And that's great. And there's nothing at all wrong with virality and success in a video that maybe even be off your brand. But fortunately, we haven't had that happen. Yeah. And so I'm really, really proud of that. And, you have these goals, right? So you want to hit 100,000 subscribers. And we did that pretty fast. And that's one of those things where there have been windows in time where it was really, really easy. That's not the right word. We saw more initial growth in YouTube channels than other times. So when you look at the world of automotive YouTube channels, there's kind of like a class of 2010 to 13 of when they started. Yeah, and they kind of got king made. Your, Super Speeders, Rob, Smoking Tire, Shmee, these guys that are just sort of the figureheads of automotive YouTube. A lot of them started about then. Then there was sort of a gap where they weren't making a huge living at it. It wasn't a huge industry. It wasn't like it was a thing so much from a journalism perspective. It was very much an expression of their passion for cars on the internet. And then you started to see journalists move over from 2015 to 17, 18. And that's where you had DeMuro and Tavares and Hoovy and me and a lot of these guys that started channels around the same time that have grown really, really nicely. And then it kind of drops off a little bit. And then in like 17 and 18, you've got the Straight Pipes and Whistling Diesel and some of these other guys that just kind of came out of nowhere, Goon Squad, and grew like crazy. I mean, like ways we never imagined, like 0 to 1 million subscribers, Donut Media, and they go at crazy. So it took us 2.5 years to get to 1 million subscribers. We gained about 1,000 a day for a good little while. And that was awesome and unexpected. And it dropped off a little bit after 1 million. And so I think we gained right at 300,000 subscribers last year, and we might do a little less than that, 250 or so in 21. But, regardless, views are up, view time is up. I mean, people spent over 2,000 years watching our videos last year, which is surreal.
I want to go back to the story. Hold on one second, JP. I want to go back to the story of the prostitute, because that one comes up more than I ever would have thought, especially when you're pitching to the Atlanta Startup Village. It came up in that pitch of the original pitch of VinWiki to this, you talked about being in entrepreneurial groups. You're there. You also have, I think in almost every one of the articles I read, there's a node to it. I think it's a great story. I love how it just has such dominance over the channel, because it really is a great video and story.
I think I've told about 150 stories on the VinWiki channel because when we started, it was one a week of mine.
Okay.
And that was the second or the third one that I told that we released. I told them all the same day, but that was a very early one. And so I definitely, what happened was when I set the Cannonball record, I wanted to write a book about it. And 3 sweaty guys drive real fast across the country without bad outcomes or bad incidents is a pretty boring story. And so I took my best stories around cars that had something to do with an element of the trip, and I wrote them out to have as an opening to each of the chapters. And that was one of them. And I'll be honest with you, there's one of the maybe the best car story I've ever heard was told by Alex Roy, the person who held the Cannonball record before me. And he tells a story about when he's on a promotional tour for his book about his record, and he gets pulled over and learns about a strange custom of a police organization in Pennsylvania. And he did an interview where somebody asked him to tell that story. And he said, it takes about 8.5 minutes to tell it. Do you want me to? And it was the strangest thing I'd ever heard anybody say. Who on earth knows how long their stories are? How? The only way is if you have recorded it and listened to it. And if I had never heard him say that, I don't know that I ever would have thought to record your best stories on the internet. And so it's one of those things that, like, you just hear something like that and you're like, I wonder how long my stories are. And so I built a lot of the detail into that story as part of writing my book. And I had finished that at the end of 2016, about 6 months before we started the YouTube channel. So my 10 to 15 best car stories were packaged, kind of like I thought about a beginning, middle, and end, and a drama that might develop, and how you might construct a story. And so that was a big part of it, is that I kind of had them ready. In the Lamborghini prostitute video, I thought about how do you describe someone who's had an augmented behind that is really hard to even understand or appreciate physically. And but how much more, how do I express it to somebody who I can't even show a picture of it to? Yeah. And I say that, well, she could take a break while she's hula hooping. And that seems to sum it up pretty well.
That is pretty amazingly picturesque, and it sums it up to a T.
That's it.
I love that. One thing I want to dive back into, this is just an anecdote here, but when Doug DeMuro came out with Cars and Bid, he better not have come to you and asked you to sponsor that, because you should have turned him down right away.
We've talked a lot about, YouTube exit strategies and, what you can use and leverage. Because, I mean, obviously he did with Cars and Bids what I did backwards with Vin Wiki.
Yeah.
Right.
I used YouTube to promote something that already existed. He used YouTube to promote a new thing he created brilliantly well.
Really done.
And he happens to launch it right as Bring a Trailer sells for a real crazy multiple of revenue. And so good on him for that. We had another sponsor at the time, Dream Car Exchange, which was a very similar concept, like a niche marketing thing. And so I actually apologized to him. I was like, I didn't know you were making this, or else I wouldn't have a competing sponsor with you. But I mean, the success that he's had there is wonderful. And I'm super proud of him.
No, I'm just giving you a hard time, because I figured, if he would have canned you, like, actually, Doug, remember that one time when you turned down Vin Wiki for your YouTube? So I can't possibly.
Just don't promote
yourself.
It just doesn't fit my brand.
Doesn't fit my brand. It's I
don't want my viewers to think that I like you better than them. It's just a tough.
It's not going to work.
They just get confused. So I want to cruise into a little bit of like the transition. So now you've established yourself as a celebrity. And I stole that term, I believe, from Rhett and Link, Good Mythical Morning, and now you're using your clout on the internet to create an amazing story, which I think has been told many times through cable and network television, but in a different way, right? Because it was very much the true cable way, right? You could see they did their little stints, and then they came and sat at a table, and I'm obviously talking about the big people in the room. And so you guys are now creating this amazing brand and shift for, I guess, all of your channels, right? So it's you, Freddie Tavares, and Tyler Hoover. So you three have now come together and created this car trek adventure where you guys are challenged and going through fun little, like, an example would be
Competitions,
competitions, driving around tracks in really, really beat up cars, especially to the point where you don't do it at the beginning, you're doing it really towards the end after they've been shown what maintenance they need. And so can we talk about like how the concept of car trek came around, why you guys decided to band together? Because I think it's interesting, because at the beginning of your YouTube career, it didn't seem like the band together concept would really be there for you, but now it's kind of come full circle.
Yeah, totally.
Cool. Yeah. So we've topped off our beverages and now we're back, and we'll roll to you, Ed.
Certainly. So, I feel like as you accumulate an audience of followers, viewers, anything like that, like you owe a couple of things to them. First, you owe it to them to be a good steward of the time that they're willing to invest in the content that you're creating. And that means that when you have the opportunity to increase production value, you should do so. And it also means that if it's based on your own experiences, then when you have the opportunity to live out any form of your dreams, you should try that too. And Car Trek is the intersection of both of those things, combined with the fact that growth on YouTube comes from collaborations. And we all grew up loving Top Gear. And it's one of those iconic things that was both the most successful and the most viewed video series ever. And when you talk about a Super Bowl every week on a cable television show or a BBC show, whatever you want to call that, it's not something that can be repeated. It's not something that can be rivaled. And it's not something that we are trying to. I call it, we get to play Top Gear. And that is exactly what it is. It is unapologetically in the vein of it. And the fact that May and Clarkson have commented that they've seen it is the most unbelievably flattering thing in the world.
That's
and
awesome.
It is. And so, but in reality, what happened was Freddie was here. He had stopped by on his road trip to Tyler's house in the Pimp My Ride van that he was giving to Tyler as a Christmas present. Giving, yeah, of all the benevolence in the world. And he stopped by to get my opinion on the car, and we're sitting around my fire. And I said, Freddie, why don't we do Top Gear challenges? So, well, you can't. They spend $2 million an episode. I said, yeah, but we buy the cars anyway, and it would be fun, and I want to. So why aren't we doing this? And we're like, well, who would the third person be? Well, obviously be a Tyler, because I had just sold him the Mercy, and he was on his way to his house. And so
who else can we sucker into this thing?
Exactly. Well, and who's different enough? Like, you have to have a different perspective. And so Freddie believes he can fix anything, and he's right. I'm not going to say the percentage of the time. And I believe I can buy anything, and Tyler will buy anything. And so you're approaching this idea that is like a fixture of the American car enthusiast, the international car enthusiast psyche, and knowing that no one's done it quite right just yet. As much as we want to love every iteration of Top Gear, and as much as they're trying, and as much money, and as great as it really is, if it was called anything else, we'd like a lot of those iterations of automotive content, but you just can't call it Top Gear because it isn't. And so we're like, well, what would we do? And we're like, well, maybe we'd obviously have to get a sponsor, because we can't afford that. And you can't make that much money per video on YouTube. And so fortunately, we had a great relationship with Auto Tempest, and we were like, look, what if we made videos that were way better than they need to be for YouTube, and we had a lot of fun doing it, and we pretended that you told us to do it. We said, and we called it Car Trek, which was Tyler's idea because he's a huge Star Trek nerd. And I said, and it's an awesome name. And I was all like, that's fantastic. Of course it's Car Trek. That's and great. So we were like, well, at the time, the C8 Corvette was the hottest thing in the world. and none of us had any interest whatsoever in a C8 Corvette. And so we're trying to create a premise as to why we would need to prove that we didn't like C8 Corvettes enough by buying the best alternative. And then we have to go out and actually do it. But again, you know, you're talking about buying cars that aren't depreciating, the same cars we would buy anyway, that, you know, maybe you got to fix, but if you do, you get all your money back on the sale eventually, whatever. Of course, you end up loving your Flood Gallardo far more than you should, and you keep it forever, and that happens, you know, and you run out of gas a lot.
Snake on it and, you know, take pictures.
Yeah, that's right. Snake loves the car. And so we enlist some much more professional shooters than us, and they show up at Freddie's warehouse one night, and they're like, did I miss the email with the shot list? No, because I don't know what a shot list is.
That's what you guys are here for.
That's it. Yeah, so, you didn't tell me what the shot list was. And they're like, because we don't know what we're doing. And it was a total nightmare, but it was so much fun. And then we tried to be a little bit more organized in the second one, and we tried to be a little bit more organized in the third one, and failed miserably both times. And but at the same time, if you'd asked me, all right, Ed, don't think about the money. Don't think about the reasons why not. Like, if you could do anything tomorrow, what would it be? It would always be buy some really cool example of a stupid car that probably I shouldn't have bought, and then go on some crazy long distance driving adventure with a bunch of friends who are also making similar mistakes. And then we compare how bad each of us are at doing it. Like, there isn't anything better than that you can do as a car enthusiast that I can think of. And especially, you know, we're going to take them to the track. We're going to probably get in trouble. I mean, all the things get checked. And so that, like I said, we owe it to our audience to live out our dreams and also do the best job we can of documenting it. And I would do it without the documentation if that were on the menu, but it isn't. And I'm totally fine with the documentation as the means with which we get to do it. And it's going to be cringy sometimes. It's going to be overly scripted sometimes. And it's going to be us manufacturing a storyline from cars falling apart when they weren't supposed to. And sometimes that happens. I mean, in Car Trek 3, the stupid North Star Cadillac blew up before we integrated it to the storyline because it was the most reliable car we had to take to dinner. And so we had to figure out how in the world does that become part of the story, because we have this car known to nuclear meltdown doing so in front of us at the moment that I'm shooting with my camera phone because they're not here yet. And then we have to figure out, well, how do we decide that Ed buys the car from Santa floating in the indoor pool of the Swingers Mansion in the forest of Tennessee or Missouri? Like, yes, that's the story. And so, you know, like Top Gear, it's not 100% real, but it's as real as we can make it, primarily handicapped by the fact that we are not filmmakers, but we have a lot of fun.
Yeah, but you guys are hilarious doing it. Even I think it's funny because even though there's the scripted pieces, it's still not like we all kind of understand as the viewers that watch it. And it's actually more entertaining to watch the scripted part as a viewer. Like, I think we love that part because we're like, all right, this part's scripted. Or like you, when you're just, you know, BSing and you're making up the text messages that don't really exist on the spot, like those are the things that are hilarious. Like, they start to come out slowly. It just makes it like you kind of feel like you're in on the joke a little bit. Not like a joke, but like you feel like you're in on it as a viewer a little bit, and you kind of understand the insight. So I think that's like from a viewer perspective why we love watching it. It's great. And you know, we get to live vicariously because I can't just go dump, you know, $60,000 on a Gallardo that's been, you know, stuck in a flood in Texas or wherever it might be.
A little too far washed.
Perhaps you should. It's some of the best money you'll ever spend, but I get that. And I think that's it, is like you want to build something that can be voyeuristic, that can be interesting to live out. And I mean, that really is what Tyler's channel is. Like, if I just went to Auto Tempest and sorted by least expensive and just clicked buy it now on the first result, that's what Tyler's whole channel has been. And for me, it's been buying a car that everybody else in the world is scared of and then making it okay. And Freddie has been buying a car that everybody has said could never be put back together and then putting it back together. And so I think there was a way for each of us to have our wins programmatically while still furthering a storyline. And like, I lose mercilessly in all of them because my cars don't so much work. But at the same time, I have more fun than either of them. And that's all I care about. And so I end up with cars that I love. And yes, I cheated because nobody clicks on a thumbnail with a 456, a 308, and a Mondial. And so I had to buy a cooler car, and the 104,000 mile third engine, second transmission, wine country rental 430 that I had, that was a 40 grand car all day long, I got outbid on it by 20,000 bucks because everybody's locked in their homes for COVID and they're overpaying for cheap Ferraris.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we lost Mike on that cam there. But yeah, I mean, I would say like one of the things that I want to ask you about is, so you're out there with, obviously you guys are all friends, right? So you all know each other. You guys have all been, like you said, kind of in this class of like folks who kind of created their YouTube channels. You're like the senior class of YouTubers who have kind of been around for a while. So you've known them, you're good friends with them. When you do these car treks, obviously, we're on to the fourth one now, right? And what's one thing that surprised you from both Hoovy and Tavares that you didn't know going into the car treks that now you know? Like, is one of them a better driver? Is one of them better at this? Like, what's one thing from each of them that you can pull?
So there's things that I've loved, and they've been part of what makes the system work that I think is super awesome. So like, in many ways, from a production perspective, Hoovy is super apathetic. Like, he just doesn't care because he's great to be there. He's on when he needs to be on. He's who he is. It's not a unnatural expression of who he is in his normal channel. Like, he'll play up the dumbest guy in all of YouTube stuff, but like, him on Car Trek is him, no question. But that being said, like, when we are having discussions about how do we tweak this edit or who's going to be there from a production team perspective, like, he couldn't care any less. And that's okay. It's great, in fact, because we're not arguing about anything. And so, I'm certainly the one that pushes Car Trek forward from a we need to do more of these perspective, because I really, 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 really love it. And but then, Freddie always is the idea guy, most of which are really bad, but sometimes they're great, and I get to filter those, and that's a whole lot of fun. But like, certain times, like when we did the second one, which was the search for the most depreciated supercar, and we tried to do it more Vegas based because we'd had such a hard time moving over a long distance in the first series, that like, it's very clear that like on these cars versus public transportation, that they're shot so 2 weeks apart that it's painful, that you can't really capture a long distance road trip. That we struggled, and so we tried to do that, but that meant that we had to rewrite the storyline as a meeting every night because of the stupid stuff that happened, and the cars catching on fire, and the cars breaking, and the cars not doing the things we thought they might do for camera. Yep. And us being really bad drivers at times as well. And so I think that was really, really interesting to me. And that was one of the things where, I'll be honest, like, we've told people to go to Auto Tempest and use it because we use it because it's a very, very powerful tool to search for your next car a lot, over and over again. And so they see a little bit of a saturation with respect to the traffic that gets newly generated with each series. And so we kind of knew with Car Trek 4 that, every time we talk to other sponsors, but Auto Tempest likes it. And even though it makes a little bit less sense each time, they've continued to say yes, and we love them for that. And there's nobody we'd rather get fake text messages from. But yeah. We wanted to figure out a way to kind of raise the stakes. And so when you think about how to compose an automotive YouTube video, when you've got cheap Ferraris and 1,000-mile road trip and the greatest road in America, and all the drama that comes from going to the track, getting terrible reports from mechanics and appraisals and all the things that we do, it has everything we could pour into a series to make it entertaining and interesting, and buying a wide variety of cars. And so, yeah, I bought a $599 that was $80,000 that should have been $130 if it was really, really nice. And that's not the price of a Camry in either circumstance. But yeah, I wrote it down by the $40,000 profit I made by selling a Diablo that may or may not have been seized by the FBI from a professional wrestler after having been stolen. And so I own it for 40 grand if you're the IRS, my accountant, or anybody that needs to hear it. But sure, the dealership thought it was $80,000 when I traded it in.
I have that, you know, that kind of rolls into a question from your friends from Car Trek, and they had asked for you to describe what is Ed Math.
Ed Math is a way to construct the purchase price of anything you really wanted to be acceptable to the people who didn't want you to do what you wanted.
It sounds like something I need.
Yeah,
it is, because at the end of the day, anything can be made to make sense if you're the right used car salesman. And there are things once you put them into your brain that you cannot turn off. And that is one of them for me, is that, you know, if you want it to make sense, I can give you a way to make it make sense. And that is Ed Math.
By making the purchase price equal $40,000.
Well, that was it. Because quite honestly, like, we knew we had to have a more modern car, right? So from a production perspective, we knew, and it all began because Tyler found this 456, and it was a fantastic car at a fantastic price. And it was kind of the price of a Camry if you discounted the servicing that was required and the shipping and the federalization and the import duties and all the things that made it $55,000. And so we're like, well, that's a Camry with every single option. So who's going to buy the Mondial or the 308? And Freddie got super excited about this estate sale 308 that,
of course,
that Tyler had found, as he would. I mean, piece of garbage, this car. I mean, I'm not saying that there aren't great 308s out there. There are some, but this was the worst one. And
which he tried to sneak in. He's like, I'm pretty sure Enzo, you know, approved of this one. He's like, actually, I don't think he did it all.
He did not. This was, you know, the thing that Enzo sold to fund some races that he wasn't going to get to go to had he not sold them to whatever sucker got slapped by a Hooters waitress before the ones that also got slapped by Hooters waitresses before Freddie. So then it's like, all right, well, nobody clicks on a 308 456 thumbnail. It just doesn't work. Like, we have to have a more modern car. And Tyler lazily didn't figure out a way to buy a 430 for 70 grand in Series 1. And so that meant that I couldn't buy a 360 for this one. So I was going to buy a 355 F1 Spider and prove once and for all that the coolest Ferrari that you could buy for the price of a Camry is a terrible idea, because you have all the time bomb issues of a 355, but it plus, you know, F1 transmission, which is garbage.
And if it catches on fire, you just throw it back over the fence to Tavares.
That's it. That's it.
Tavares will take it.
And we had chosen not to take Tyler's 348 because that was kind of the backup car, was that if one of our cars didn't make it to the start, we would build that into the storyline, fly to Wichita, convince Tyler's wife that we were there on purpose and he wanted us to take this 348, and we were just going to drive it to the starting line. And so we couldn't do a 348. I couldn't do a 360. The 355 that I found that was totally perfect was a $20,000 car, not a $40,000 car, and I was not going to pay that. And the 430 from the Wine Country Rental Company was too much money. So Camrys lease terribly, really, really bad, which is ironic considering they're economical cars to own. So a high option Camry is $500+ a month. And with a sponsor like Premier Financial, and I mean, you just go to them, get a good residual on a high mile 12 FF, I could have a $550 payment. And I'm like, that sounds great. I'd like to have an FF for rallies and things. But then overnight, FF prices just went nuts. So stupid. And so I'm like, well, I'm not paying that either way. And then this $599 that I've wanted forever, I finally got to take 80 grand, but it's not a loanable car. Like, nobody considers branded titles to be sufficient collateral. And so I had to figure out another way to make it Ed Math 40 grand. But I had this Diablo, which I can't fully tell the story of just yet for reasons that I can't say just yet. And so I was going to make some money on it. And I did a very Hoovy style deal with another sponsor. and treated it as a trade, wrote down the car. I did pay $40,000 for it, but I did so by making $40,000 on another car. Yeah. And so it was 40 grand. And I love the car. Like, quite honestly, if you're going to buy a car from 80 to 125 grand, it's a wonderful option.
Yeah.
That's why.
I mean, it's like 6-liter V12, like 600 plus horsepower, just animal, right?
It's wonderful. And it is wrong in every way that it can be wrong, but still get where you told it to go. But I mean, it's great. And, you know, the Gallardo, I actually thought was going to be a pretty decent car for Car Trek 1, and it broke every episode in like a really meaningful way. And that's great for television. And the 599 does that too. Like, it malfunctions a lot, but it keeps going. And that's one of those things with exotic cars that even when they're broken, they tend to keep doing what they just did. If they just did braking, they'll keep braking. But if they kept going miles, then we just kept putting miles on it. And I certainly boiled the coolant at episode 2 at the track, but I didn't know that because I didn't have gauges. So who cares?
What are you going to do? You know, what are you going to do? It's all part of the experience. I think that's why we love the show. You know,
yeah. And I had to answer the question from one of the crew members: are you actually going to pour bottled water into the radiator of an Enzo motor? And I was like, why wouldn't I do that? And he's like, it'll get to Advanced Auto Parts. Go put some coolant in it. That's right. And we had to figure out the right color of coolant for a 599. And I think we mixed them the right way. Probably not.
It all adds to it. Yeah, it'll be fine. You guys have a host of people who can take care of that stuff. You'll be okay.
Yeah.
Well, that was the thing, is like,
Freddie can fix it.
They in Top Gear specials, all the breakdowns are fabricated, and there's duplicates of all the cars. And so I'm like, how do we really do that? So once I get Freddie convinced that he's okay doing it, I have to sort of figure out the fact that I know the car wranglers and the stunt drivers from Top Gear now, and it ain't real. And so we can't we can almost afford to make it real. We most certainly cannot afford to make it not real.
Yeah.
And so, first of all, can we even sell it? Like, when our cars break, they don't always break well for camera because it's real braking. Like, but we didn't have the ability to buy multiple cars. Now, I mean, as I've revealed, I bought a backup Gallardo for Car Trek 1 because, you know, we had 6 figures into production and my car wasn't ready. And I was like, I'm going to have to overpay for another car. And so I bought a terrible car as a backup. And it was literally 15 minutes before I departed that I figured out which car I was going to put my bags into to drive down to Freddie's. And I ended up selling it and not losing money miraculously. But it's just one of those things that you just never really know. And so we bought backup cars. We bought the M6 as a backup car for 2. We bought the Cadillac as a backup for 3. And we treated the 348 as a backup. We can buy a backup Ferrari for this because, you know, they especially within the constraints of the rules. And so, so that was that. But you never know what's going to go wrong. And that's why it's so much fun.
Well, you know, there is the top of the line Camry that you could have gone against. It's the Camry TRD edition.
Yeah, but it's still only like we tried every way to get them above 45 grand, but that was really.
I think it's like, I think with the dealer, because it's at TRD, they mark it up. They're like 46.5. I'm like, why the hell would you buy a freaking $45,000 Camry? I have no idea.
You should have fabricated a sticker price, Ed, and been like, no, I saw this one at the dealer, $75K.
That's right. We got a rubber shortage. We got a microchip shortage. If you think you're paying sticker for a Camry, you are living in last month, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, I don't know what you guys are talking about.
This has extra microchips. This car comes with it. So the other question from your friends from Car Trek is they want to know, there's apparently a story from the first night at your rental house for season 1 that's a very impactful story to tell. I don't know. They just said ask about the first night at a rental house for season 1.
Yeah, so we don't know anything about how you run a production with a crew or any of that junk. And so we literally, Freddie kept saying, like, I've got a document that I'm about to build of all the plans of where everybody has to go, and he never did it. But he did Airbnb us some like farmhouse in the seaplane capital of the world, Tavares, Florida. And so he rents this place. I don't know on what platform. I don't know if it was legitimate. I know that I reimbursed him for it out of the budget. And so in the middle of the night, well into some of the beverage we're enjoying this evening, I'm asleep, and this guy barges into this rental house with a key and is like, what's going on here? And I come out in my underpants and am asking him what's going on. And he did not know that his property had been rented by some third party. And there were spiders, there were used Band-Aids in the bed sheets. There were, it was in the middle of literally a trailer park farm that we had somehow rented this little house that Freddie had found for us. And so the crew has no idea what's going on. They can't sleep because they're horrified at what they're contracting in the moment. And this was literally like the week before COVID became real. So, because all of our wives were having babies. My wife and Tyler's wife were due the same day.
No way.
Yes. And Tyler's sister also due the same day. Not significant to the storyline.
So you guys
took like 2 months later. And that's not some like salmon crack situation, like a real sister.
Yeah.
We then are, so that's kind of, we tried to mix it in, and we actually talked about for Car Trek 2 that we would begin it by exiting a vasectomy clinic, but we voted against that. And so like my wife was in labor while I was at Amelia. Like I drove real fast home as the contractions became closer together. And so it was a real storyline of kind of this last hurrah that we probably didn't build out well enough because we didn't know what we were doing. But yeah, that first night, that first few days in that stupid place, and we had proper people, like guys that work on Motor Trend and Drive, all like real legitimate shows, not our mess. And they were not happy about where we put them. And
what happened? What happened after this? What happened?
Just disgusting places, and
you got
people
Florida
barging in the middle of the night, threatened to shoot us, and then we didn't, like, we were going to go to Miami because why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
And then we realized that's a long way away, and so then we decided, well, you know what, we could just go to Donald Trump's house because it's around the corner, and why don't we go there? And then they threw us out of there because reasons, and we continued along. So it was all just such a train wreck, but it was fun. It was like getting to relive college, but with Lamborghinis and Ferraris.
And it's interesting because it's just like you got Florida Man.
Yeah, we totally got Florida Man.
The first time you showed up, and weirdly enough, you met a true Florida Man too, because they will kick down the door. They don't care about the spiders or the Band-Aids. They really care about why are you on their property. And by the way, I've been drinking since 6 a.m. 4 days ago.
That's right.
And I don't know what's going on. So yeah, I mean, I'm excited to see where Car Trek can go, because I feel like you're at the beginning, and you know there's this weird shift in the world that we're going through. And JP kind of said this before we started recording, or maybe at the beginning, was he only, and I really only watch YouTube. That's our medium. Sure. And Rob Lowe on Joe Rogan said once that, he was 67th. He was a child actor, and one of his shows, he was 67th on the I don't know what the show rating is. And they were getting 2 million views a week, which is big.
Huge.
But now I think TV shows are getting far less views. So like if a TV show gets maybe 800,000 views a week, they're probably pretty high up there. Where like, you know, I don't know, what,
Yeah, I mean, 2 million
311,000.
views a week is bad for Vin Wiki.
Yeah, exactly. So there's this shift to these mediums like YouTube where they're just growing so fast. It's interesting that, you know, there's got to be, we're in the infancy of where kind of the next generation of media can go. And I really, really look forward to where it can go. And I hope Car Trek can be that catalyst to grow the channel and the community itself.
No, sorry, man. It bounced me back to a different network.
You're good. Did you hear what I said about
I got the Rob Lowe thing through, you know, and we talked about differences in 2 million views a week.
Yeah, I just think that, you know, we're in this infancy of transition kind of where YouTube, you can get 2 million views a day, a week,
Oh yeah,
a month. You know, you say that's not a great week for you guys, or a month, you know, and it's wild to see that where traditional media senses are just kind of going out of the way. And I really see the
totally
impact of YouTube coming right now.
And it's interesting because that's good and bad, right? So Top Gear was getting millions of views an episode.
Insane numbers.
But they were only releasing 10 to 20 episodes a year. And it's different when you're offering someone a perspective into your life on a daily basis, because you're not just manicuring who you are as a persona in that finite amount of minutes on TV.
Right.
And it doesn't make either right or wrong. It just means it is different. And I think that as people try to decide how they're going to formulate a content strategy for any kind of platform, they have to weigh in how much of their time do they have to make themselves public towards their audience. And, you know, I think that with YouTube, it's a lot more than a cable television show.
Yeah, definitely. You get that. There's a clear break where when production ends in cable TV, you're gone. But the expectation of YouTube from anyone out there is they, you know, when Car Trek ends, that ends. But they want to know, hey, Ed, how's your family doing? Let me see the garage. That's why you have your own channel, which we didn't even talk about. Your self-titled channel is like you have another outlet, but like, you know, they want to know when Tavarish had his son, or I don't know if it's a son or daughter, sorry. When he had his child, there was a lot of weird comments on other videos of like, where'd you go? What's going on? The community sometimes doesn't understand what's going on, and that the people behind the lens are just regular humans living their lives, and you don't really get that break on YouTube.
No, you don't. And that's good, right? I mean, like, it is an invitation to have a little bit more intimacy with a content creator than a movie star.
Right.
Right? Nobody's going to expect that if you walked up to Brad Pitt and you told him how much you loved Mr. and Mrs. Smith in Ocean's 11, that, you know, he was going to say, thank you. That I want to hear why that resonated with you so that I can do more like that in the future. And that is very much what we're talking about. Like, if you love Car Trek, if you love our car stories, like, I do care that that's meaningful, because I want to make sure that there's an impact to what I'm doing. I don't want to scream into a void in a way that people don't appreciate or something like that. And I want to make sure that as we field storytellers, that we're putting them in the right genres that people care, right? And that is very, very different than popular culture. It's different than traditional media. It's different than other forms of media. It's different than the way Facebook or TikTok or anything else might work. And so I think that, again, we have to be stewards of people's time. That I can't get lost in the fact that people spend decades and decades a day watching content. I want to make sure that it's worth it. And I want to make sure that if I give someone the platform to tell a good car story, that it's something that deserves to be there. And I don't hit it every day. I'm not saying that I do. I'm just saying that, you know, given the constraints that I have, I'm doing the best that I can, but I'll try to do better if people think that I'm not doing well enough. And I'll try to, point it more to the app and point it more to what we're trying to do. And I will absolutely try to create more opportunities for myself, like Car Trek, where I get to go have fun.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
I feel so. Justin Purser, he was on our podcast. He made a video with CJ Hobgood, Floridian surfer, who won the world title in 2001. But so he kind of summed up how successful YouTubers work to me in a very simple way, where the difference between TV and traditional media senses is watching it, you never think that that's going to be your real life. You're watching a sitcom, you're thinking like that's not your life. It's portrayal of life. But YouTube, the best YouTubers make it seem like I could do exactly what that person's doing. So someone like, Hoovie's Garage, oh, I have $2,500. I could buy that car. I could do that. And when you guys do Car Trek, maybe, $60,000 to buy a car might not be reality for most people, but they see, oh, I have friends, like we could go buy cars, we could do these fun things, we could do activities, and you make it real to almost everyone watching, and they make it feel like I could do something similar or like that. And I thought that was an interesting perspective. That's the difference and the bridge and the gap that kind of ties it all together for me.
No, I agree with that. So from y'all's perspective, do you feel like Car Trek is the right amount aspirational versus entertaining?
I think
love it.
it. Well, season.
I can think of just from being a car enthusiast, a guy who's bought old cars that need a lot of work. I maybe have a similar mindset where I could say, hey, you could go out and buy a fairly brand new car for $50,000, or what you could do is buy a very nice, well-spec'd 2010 M3 coupe, DCT manual, whatever you want. Check the rod bearings, whatever, and you're in that car for 30,000, and then maybe you're going to put it a couple more thousand into it. Like, my brain works like that. And I think that's what I love about your guys' content, is I am continually thinking like, okay, well, if I was going to spend that much, like I could just write a check for this car now. And then anything else on top of that, I can put my modifications on it. I can do this, I can enjoy the car. I can be a part of it and be more so like an interactive experience with my own vehicle, versus just buying something brand new out of the box and maybe have a 3-year lease and give it up after a couple of years. So for me, I love it because I think of when I get old, or like even now, I'm like, if I'm moving somewhere and I have a garage, I'm like, all right, what am I going to buy next? It's not going to be something brand new. I can tell you that much right now. You know what I mean? It's going to be used, and I'm going to try to find a way to justify it. Maybe use a little Ed math, try to work that into the garage. But I mean, that's what I love about it. It's like, being a car enthusiast, you guys are driving a lot of cars that we love. You're doing a lot of things that we want to do. And like, even from the Car Trek thing, it's like, I'm texting with my buddies, like, let's go enter a lemon race. Let's all go spend $800 on a car and do like a lemon race and create some content and like have a video around it. Like that's fun. That's cheap. It's great to get out with your friends and do something and just be a part of something. But yeah,
I feel like
from my perspective, I think it is aspirational. I think it's scalable too. You know what I mean? Is the way I look at it.
Yeah, for me, it bridges the gap of like exactly what JP was saying about the lemon race. It's like you can do almost every one of the things that you guys are doing. Obviously, the aspiration is like, yeah, I want to be able to buy Ferraris with my friends, drive, go do these amazing things. But at the same time, it kind of comes back to cannonballing, like we're talking at the beginning. It's about the community that you're part of. It's about doing something really fun and cool with your friends and finding that you guys spent hundreds of hours just getting the car ready. And maybe you don't spend 100 hours, but you spend 15 hours and you buy an $800 car from Craigslist. And for 3 weeks, you and your friends have this thread that is like, this is the car. We're buying this 88 van and we're going to just go to the steel before what is going on right now, where steel and building materials are skyrocket, but you're going and you're buying all these materials and you're figuring out you're buying a welder on Wish and all these kind of things, and you're putting it all together and building everything out. And I think it's more about like the aspiration might not be exactly what you guys are portraying, but it's the message which you're putting out there that's more important to me. And I think that's really what provides me as not a car guy, right? Like my dad was the opposite, and he listens to every one of the podcasts. Where one time when my sister my first car was this Jetta, and it was my sister's car, and my sister put these lights inside of the car, and my dad was like, "You should not do that. Nothing should be you don't put anything other than a factory option on cars. Don't touch cars. You just take it to a dealership, all that stuff." So he was very anti that, which is weird because he is a very like, he could fix anything, electrical, plumbing, drywall, anything in your house, but anything comes with a car, he's all far away from it. So I really love what you guys put out there. It's like, it's more about the community and having fun with your friends, which is what
I really, really appreciate that. I mean, I honestly, I appreciate the fact that what we're doing is interesting enough that it might be right.
Yeah.
Like the idea that, and the same thing about Vin Wiki stories, like the fact that somehow shot in the literal dark, we managed to hit a content strategy that worked, feels great, and has worked well. And again, it's a series of happy accidents to have worked the way that it has. And for Car Trek to be in that vein, like, I don't care if I ever make $1 off of doing Car Trek. Like, it's the kind of thing you would pay money to do. I don't have money laying around to pay to do it, but if I had to, I'd find it. And so I hope that it's aspirational. I hope it's entertaining, but I hope that very much it's that, you know, that way that we watched Bam Margera and Rob Dyrdek and the reality stars of a decade or two ago, thinking like, man, if you gave me $250,000 episode, I'd figure out a way to do that. And certainly that you don't have to have a fraction of that for YouTube, but you can find ways to have a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, and you can make it seem like it can be relevant to any audience. Because like I can tell you, I'm not a car. I love watching car content.
Sure.
And I don't know like the details that you guys are talking from engine specs and things like that. Like but I can see what you guys are doing, and I would love very much to like say, hey, JP, me, you, a couple of your buddies and my buddies, we're all going to go to your bachelor party. And part of going to it is like, you need to drive there in like an $800 car, and we're just going to figure it out and, you know, rent a ranch in Montana and just rally them. And at the end of it, call, I don't know, Junker or whatever, and they come pick up the cars. But so I'm going to start rolling us out. And I have, thank you for tagging us on Instagram. It really helps us.
Sure.
Appreciate that.
We got an unbelievable amount of questions. And
yeah. Disclaimer. I'll give the disclaimer. If your Instagram name is hard to read, that's your fault. He can't pronounce everything. No, just kidding. We'll do our best. Mike does our best to get the Instagram handles right, but you never know. You get some weird ones in there. So
did you guys get a lot of questions when I shared it?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well,
we're gonna
unbelievable.
We're going to run through some Instagram questions for you.
I think this is the most questions that we've gotten thus far. So I'm super excited. Now, there is, I want to apologize to everyone in advance for twofold. Like JP said, I'm definitely going to mess up your name. And there's another chance that like I can't answer your question today. But you know what? I really look forward to like, I think we've created a great friendship, and I look forward to what it goes. And maybe when Vin Wiki hits, 4 million or 5 million subscribers, we can come back and look at what the changes have happened. I think the strategy's there, but who knows? Or when Car Trek becomes a reality TV show, we can determine why that happened and learn more. So I'm going to ask 3 questions of the a lot questions that we have. So Lath, and your name will be right there. What car or cars do you regret selling?
There's only 2 that really stand out. I loved the manual 360 Spider that we had as part of the supercar rentals fleet. I've tried to buy it back several times, including for Car Trek 1 and Car Trek 4. It was Rosso Corsa over Crema, which is cream, like stained, terrible, been redone since then, interior. It's got 70,000 miles on it now, and I love that car, and I do miss it, both for what it meant for me professionally, because that was really kind of the inflection point of like the rental car company becoming like a real thing, but also just because it's a stick 360 Spider. It's as much fun as you could possibly have. That one and the Iranian terrorist drug dealer crashed drunk Lamborghini. I replaced it with a nicer one, but there is a lot of time where I wish I had the older one because it just has such a better story.
Sometimes the car is about the story, not so much about the car.
That's exactly right.
Or how you got it. How you got it. It's always important too.
So then, man, I'm picking easy names. I'm going to say that, and I'm going to screw myself real quick. Crazy Cuban Jr. Are there any exotics outside of Europe?
Are any exotic cars not European?
Yes, exactly. I think that's what he's trying to say.
Certainly. Yeah, there's not a specific definition of what makes a car exotic, but certainly it needs to be something that just overwhelms you emotionally when you encounter it. It needs to be something that compels you, that someone could set a goal around. It needs to be something that is certainly high performance, is certainly rare, is certainly significant with respect to the world of the automobile, but very much the manufacturer. And so I think it's very, very, very fair to say that Ford GTs are exotic. I think it's fair to say that Dodge Vipers, especially ACRs, Extremes, are exotic. Maybe some ZR1s are exotic. If not, definitely some of the more boutique modified American cars like a Hennessy Viper or a nice Celine Mustang, something like that could be considered to be exotic. If we try to go Japanese, I don't find most Japanese cars to be exotic because they're not limited production. But I think you could certainly say that an LFA is an exotic car. I don't think an R34 GTR is an exotic car unless you put it into a marketplace where it's not, common. But yeah, I mean, I think there certainly are non-European exotics. It's not where I go, only because there is a very material difference in what it feels to drive a British or Italian car compared to a really cool American car. Doesn't mean either's right or wrong. Doesn't mean that you're wrong to love any kind of car. It just means that those are the ones that really, really speak to me. And they do that because they are materially different than the cars from America or Japan.
Yeah. I like that. I like the mentality, though. I think the limited edition or limited run, right? You can't just have Camry and say it's a, exotic car.
And there's great cars that are not exotic.
Yes.
For sure. I mean, a Honda S2000 would be an exotic car if it was built by a British manufacturer and they made 500 of them a year.
Yeah.
Because it's performance oriented enough and it's fun enough. However, they're reasonably common and that makes them non-exotic. They're special, they're great, they're awesome, they're worth owning, but probably not exotic.
Well, according to Bring a Trailer's recent prices, they are exotic, Ed.
Well, and could you buy a cooler car for how much you have to pay for a car is not a metric that is traditionally associated with being exotic. It's one of the, we've had Craig Lieberman by recently, who was the technical advisor for Fast and Furious. He's a reason why they used Supras and R34 GTRs. And, he's quick to say, like, an Integra Type R or an R34 GTR or a Supra compared to what you could buy for what they cost now is not a good deal. It's not what you should buy. And when he sold the R34 Skyline that was in Fast and Furious 2, Too Fast, Too Furious, he bought a Diablo because that was a real exotic car. And he didn't love the first one. He liked the second one better. But regardless, it's like, it is what it is.
That Skyline, man, that is an iconic car. That is everything about it. I mean, I can just see that. And there's a ton of questions about some of the cars that you were talking about. Like I said, I'm not a car guy. I'm just scrolling and looking at names and things like that. But the final question. Oh crap! I thought I had it.
And that's a great Vin Wiki, by the way. The Fast and Furious, just how they go to importing some of those R34 GTRs and things like that, and the ones that they destroyed and the process. That's a very good big plug there because that's a fun listen. for
It
car
is,
for,
yeah.
for car heads, because the inflation of prices is so out of control right now on cars. I don't know what the deal is with this bubble, but car prices are insane right now, and they don't always reflect.
They are. I mean, people aren't spending money on vacations. They are managing to make money. Small businesses are way more profitable because they're not paying traveling salesmen to travel. And so you're seeing just a crazy surge in the marketplace. And it's cool because if you own one of the cars, they've gone up in value, but like that doesn't mean you can justify replacing them with a slightly nicer thing that is a price that you could never have justified paying 3 years ago. And so I don't know what it means long term, but it is a wild, wild world to live in for sure.
It's like if you could sell, everyone could sell their house for more than it paid for it right now, but where are you going to move? Because you can't buy a house. Right?
That's exactly right. That's a perfect analog.
Yeah. So the final question that I'm going to have, and I apologize for those who I did not ask their question. I hope there's a lot of questions I think we answered previous to this, but underscore Max Stevens asked underscore at the end asked, what was the one car that got away from you?
Oh, no question. And it's hard to say that it got away because I could not have afforded it. But if I had moved heaven and earth and done everything in my power, and that was the only thing that mattered, I could have. But it was Wyclef Jean's McLaren F1, and it was $600,000 in 2004. And I'm trying to drive it for the intro of Car Trek 5, and today it's easily worth $15 million.
Who owns it right now?
The Revs Institute. It's a big collection out of Florida. Yeah. So to me, I own my dream car. All right. And that is a huge blessing. I manipulated the market of my dream car. I am
it's
the
Toyota Camry.
What's that?
It's a Toyota Camry.
That's it. It's a Camry. No, it's a manual transmission Lamborghini Murcielago LP640. And I documented the rarity. I made them go up in value. I bought 3 of them, and I own one that I intend to own forever. And that is my biggest honor and my proudest achievement as a car enthusiast, is to be able to say that. And I think that as people think about who they are as car enthusiasts, like owning your dream car is the thing. It's the holy grail. And so I count myself as blessed because I have it. And because I made them go up in value, I have it without a gigantic loan attached to it, which is a bigger privilege.
And it's one of
so
what? That car is one of 32, right?
Yeah. So, and 2 or 3 of them probably don't exist. They're probably misrepresented VINs, but regardless, they're ultra rare. And mine is the worst one. That's a U.S. car. It's a high mile, driven all the time, parked anywhere. I, don't hesitate to drive it anywhere that I want to go. But like above that is an F1. And short of me being able to uncover the car that was owned by El Chapo's best drug runner, that's brown over red with a set of gold wheels, which I think is spectacular. I don't necessarily know that I'll ever own one. And that's okay, because everybody that owns them says they're, less remarkable to drive than they ought to be worth 10 or 15, $20 million. But I love mine, and I think it's the perfect car. And most importantly, it's perfect because it's imperfect to most people, and it's perfect to me. And so I love that about it, and I'm very, very happy to have it. And so I one day, maybe an F1, I can't fathom how that would come together, because I'm not road mapping my life to have 15 or 20, $30 million in disposable income, because that seems crazy, but I really love mine.
Well, you should buy some Car Trek merch today. So
that's it. Yeah.
Well,
compelled, free.
I like your take on your Lamborghini though, because you've got the way you just laid it out, and don't take this as offense. You got the worst house in the nicest neighborhood.
Yeah.
That's the best way to do it. Absolutely.
And I like that you also were talking kind of about, like, I don't know, having that car, or going back to the Wyclef Jean car, it's the key example of why Vin Wiki exists in my mind, of like, yeah, you could get any car in the world, but can you actually verify like that it was Jean-Claude Van Damme's or was Wyclef's? Like, that nostalgia takes the car to a different level. And those images of him walking out of a, club, getting into the car, makes that car 100% worth every penny past what the value of the traditional car is worth.
Well, and that's very, very true. But smoking weed in a car and being involved in Haitian Ponzi schemes is probably not the most aggrandizing thing about a car.
Probably not.
So
Yeah.
it was
Mystique
only
in
because it
F1.
was the cheapest McLaren F1 ever to change hands, and I had
Okay.
a shot at it. And again, it's one of those things that it's so iconic that you feel compelled to it. Like, I could argue there's a whole lot of better cars than a Mercy, but it's me, and it's outrageous and dramatic and exciting and analog and manual and beautiful and fast enough without being so fast you can't actually put the pedal to the floor. And so it ticks all of my boxes, and it motivates me not to make people believe it's best, but to believe that what they've been told is best might actually not be best for them.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's most critical when you consume so much. Because when I was 20 years old consuming automotive media, it was LimeWire downloads of weird drag races that didn't make sense and certainly weren't fair. And, bootleg Top Gear through, finalgear.com. And so that's very different than the way people approach it. Right now, you're fed so much information to tell you that because a 765 LT is so fast, or because this version of a Ferrari is the best, or whatever, that might not be true for you. Like, there is a car that checks your boxes in ways that nothing else can. And the treasure, in the same way that Cannonball for me was solving the problem and proving the things about myself, there is a car that satisfies the things that you want to use a car for that could never be prescribed by Road and Track or Car and Driver. But when you find that, that's what is sublime. That's what's so perfect.
It just shocks me
that connection.
Yeah, it just shocks me that you want an F1 after one of your most famous early videos is this guy talking about like how the car is so expensive to every little thing.
It is. And, fortunately, if you keep driving it, that stuff matters an awful lot less. But there's good ties there. And it is I haven't driven one. Maybe I'll end up driving that one sometime. But
I thought that was one of the most eye-opening videos to me, because I had no idea what the car was. I knew where they started as a brand, and like now obviously they've gone the opposite of growing value. I feel like their value has gone down and they've overproduced and kind of gone a different way, but we can talk about that a different time. But it's interesting to see, like, I didn't understand the beginnings of where they came from, and it was basically an F1 car that you could drive on the road.
Sure.
And there's a difference between, the parts and pieces that go into, we keep using the example of a Toyota Camry, but there's a difference between the functionality of the parts and pieces of a Toyota Camry, where they don't have a shelf life and they don't have a long-term life. And when you go to the track mentality, it has that. And it was interesting. It was cool. So I like that video a lot. There's a reason why it got over 1 million views. So I'm gonna roll it to JP and
let's do that. And I will say, it's funny, as I start to get older now and I go through my nostalgia car phase, which is, my Integra GSR, my B5 S4, all that. It's like, while some of them are fast, it's like slow car driven fast is oftentimes more fun than fast car. You know what I mean? So it's interesting. We'll see how things play out, especially we'll see how the markets play out. But I guess ultimately, so what I would do right now is I would, we'd crack a beverage. I'm out of beverages. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to send it over to you. And I'll say, Loved having you on. Appreciate it. Been consuming you and your constituents content for a very long time. So appreciate everything that you guys give to us that are doing our regular day jobs. Gives us a little something to do for the monotony as we're going through our day. So appreciate that. But yeah, would love to hear. Just tell us, where they can follow you. What other channels you got. Promote the car trek and anything else that you wanna let the people know. The floor is yours, Ed.
Oh, well, thank you so much. No, we'll have released the second episode of Car Trek 4 today. We'll be well on our way to headed to Amelia Island to start filming Car Trek 5. And you can follow us at Vin Wiki and at Ed Bolian. But most importantly, just, thank you so much to anybody who cares. And it's been such a tremendous honor to have the chance to speak to a much larger audience than any of us deserve. And I hope that it's clear that we never take that lightly, and that we're grateful for the opportunity to not necessarily have influence, but have the ability to share something beyond ourselves. And it's awesome to command the attention of everybody at a bar or everybody at a party or everybody at a dinner. But at the same time, to be able to speak to millions of people is something that is humbling and is significant and is awesome. And I think more than that, to be able to convert that into opportunities that we never thought we'd have, that we dreamt of, beyond the cars we dreamt of. The whole recipe has been one of the biggest blessings in my life. And so it's been an amazing ride, and it started by things that I never intended to happen. And I think that's one of those grace of God things, that his plans for what we might do are so much bigger than what I could game plan, what I could ever imagine, what I could roadmap or put a business plan together for. And it's things that have been hopefully good for him and good for me.
Fantastic. Well put. And it's not lost on us as the viewers who absorb the content. And we look forward to everything you guys have going forward. So thank you so much for being here, Ed. Fantastic. Great chatting with you. Appreciate the stories and learning a little bit more about the past, present, future of you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you guys so much for having me. Good luck growing yours.
Thank you. And everything is in the show notes, including a link to his book. Check it out. I've started the audio version of reading it to myself, and I'm excited. It's a great read so far. There's
an audio version?
I'm reading it to myself.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. All right. Yeah. No.
This is the first book I've bought in a long time to myself, like to read, because I usually do audiobooks, but there is no audio version, so I bought it, and I really like it so far. I'm only about 50 pages in, so.
Awesome. Well, you guys have a great night, and thank you all so much for watching.